Damn, say what you will about McLaren, and trust me, I don't have any reason to say nice things about anybody, but uh they keep things so interesting. Like, let's just be honest. Like, what would we be talking about in IndyCar if not for McLaren over the last, like, I don't even want to say month. Let's say the last 5 years. Oh yeah, hybrids. We're going to be talking about hybrids this weekend at the Mid Ohio Sports Car Course. I will be, of course, covering that race in person. I'm really looking forward to talking to the drivers and other folks in the paddock about the hybrids and seeing what those are all about. I'm As we get closer and closer to the hybrids, I become more and more optimistic about the impact that they're going to have on the racing. Hopefully, it's positive and interesting. We like things to be different, especially from a technical standpoint, and it's a good first step, I would say. But yeah, huge news today. Alexander Rossi has been announced that he will leave Arrow McLaren at the end of the year, and he will be replaced by Christian Lundgaard, who will be stepping into the number 7 Arrow McLaren car away from Rahal Letterman Lanigan. So we've got a ton of silly season to talk about. Some stuff that you might not have heard elsewhere. I'll try to keep information fresh and interesting for you guys, but I've got a lot to talk about because while I wouldn't say this is a shocking move, it's been rumored for quite a while. In fact, I heard about the potential for this, believe it or not, as early as last year. There was talk of Christian Lundgaard going to Arrow McLaren. So he's been on their radar for a while. And I think this move makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. And the easiest reason that I can give you is that Christian Lundgaard is the only driver in the last couple of years to not be a part of one of the big four IndyCar teams and win a race. Those four teams being Penske, Ganassi, McLaren, and Andretti. And even then, you could chop that four into an additional only two teams, Penske and Ganassi, who have had the lion's share of victories. Only drivers like Colton Herta, Pato O'Ward, and Kyle Kirkwood have really scored wins outside of those two powerhouse teams. But the fact that Lundgaard actually won a race for a team that wasn't previously mentioned, Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing, I think raised his stock significantly to the point where this move had to be made from Christian Lundgaard's standpoint. So let's take a look at what McLaren put out earlier today. Now, boy, oh boy, I've spent so much time in the last couple of years on the McLaren website reading press releases. They should start paying me for reading this as much as I do. But, there's not much in here that you haven't already heard, so I won't read it all. But the first line of the press release is that the three drivers on the grid make up the youngest trio in the NTT IndyCar series, and specifically, Arrow McLaren IndyCar team announced today that its 2025 driver lineup is confirmed with the addition of Christian Lundgaard, who will join Pato O'Ward and Nolan Siegel in the team's three-car lineup following the close of this season. The trio of Pato, Nolan, and Christian will make up one of the youngest teams in the NTT IndyCar series. Each driver has proven success on his resume that warrants a promising outlook for Arrow McLaren for seasons to come. And we'll read these quotes, although what did we learn in the Alex Palou drama? Take these quotes with a grain of salt. It's possible the drivers didn't even say these, but we'll read them anyway. Christian Lundgaard says, "I'm excited to have my plans set for 2025 and beyond. I'm thrilled that it's with Arrow McLaren. I've got a lot of respect for Zach, Gavin, and Tony and the team, and I think that Pato, Nolan, and I will work well together. I'm focused 100% on finishing the season strong with Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing. We have a lot of the season left, but this is a huge weight off of my shoulders that will hopefully let me compete at my best the next 9 races." Alexander Rossi's quote, "My time at Arrow McLaren, while it's only been 2 short seasons, has been rewarding in many ways. I'm grateful to have been part of the team's internal growth. The number 7 crew is fantastic, and I've built a lot of long-lasting friendships within the team. Zach, Gavin, Tony, and I have had many conversations over the last several months on my future with the team. We were not able to come to terms on a new deal, so the mutual decision is to part ways is amicable. I'm very confident with the current discussions in the paddock to land a new spot. I'll have good news to follow soon, and meanwhile, I'm focused on a top 5 finish in the 2024 championship and a strong conclusion to my time in Papaya." And this is what team principal Gavin Ward has to say Alexander has been an incredible teammate. We're grateful for our 2 seasons we're racing with him. We wouldn't be where we are today without him. Ultimately, we couldn't meet in the middle on terms, but we absolutely wish him the best. We'll do all that we can in the second half of the season to get him a top 5 in the championship. Christian has proven success in his last few seasons racing in the series, and he checks the boxes for what we're looking for in terms of speed and potential along Pato and Nolan. The three make up the youngest trio on the NTT IndyCar Series grid, and we know that the direction has been paying off for our F1 counterparts with Lando and Oscar. We're looking towards our long-term goal of sustained high performance, and I believe with these 3 drivers and the ongoing support of Arrow and our amazing partners, we'll take a good step in that direction for 2025. Interesting line there, to say the least, considering some of the rumors that have been going around about Arrow and their partnerships in IndyCar. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the video, at least briefly. We'll touch on it. Lundgaard. Now, I already mentioned this is probably the best option available to him. And let me explain why. Penske is set. Penske's not going to expand to a 4th car. They are set at 3. So if you're Christian Lundgaard, you couldn't go there, at least for the foreseeable future. Maybe you could have signed a short-term deal at Rahal and maybe try to wait Will Power out. But, Will Power's been performing as well as he ever has been this season. So, Will Power's career could extend very, very long. So I think that wasn't a realistic option. Chip Ganassi Racing. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. There are 5 cars currently on Chip Ganassi Racing. And let's say one of those seats open up. That's not confirmed by any stretch of the imagination. And I wouldn't necessarily say that's an expectation either. So if you're Christian Lundgaard, would have Ganassi been an option? Probably not. Especially, if you look at the 2 team leaders there, Scott Dixon and Alex Palou, do they really want a challenger? Or are they quite happy winning over half of the races each season? I think I know what the answer is there from both Scott and Alex. Well, at least if you gave them truth serum. I think they would be quite happy to keep things the way that they are at Chip Ganassi Racing. So Ganassi's out. Andretti Global. They reduced from 4 cars to 3 cars this year. The 4th car, well, we'll talk about that later. But for the time being, a 4th car in any capacity, under any branding or badging, isn't on the table for Christian Lundgaard. So he couldn't go there. That left Arrow McLaren. Arrow McLaren is an interesting team, to say the least, in IndyCar. They definitely keep things interesting, as I mentioned before, and there is a very clear direction now of that team. Gone are the veteran drivers. Gone are the drivers who have, had a foothold for a while in the series. It is now 25-year-old Pato O'Ward, who is the senior driver on that racing team. Arrow McLaren is going young. They're building for the future. And clearly from the moves that they've made and the very aggressive move to get Nolan Siegel, they want to lock their guys down right away. And I think they're tired of messing around. And believe it or not, I think everybody's kind of tired of the messing around with the contracts. But they have their 3 guys now. It's Pato, it's Nolan, and it's Christian. And I think that Christian, look, man, I think everybody in the paddock knows that he overperformed at Rahal. The Rahal team is I don't want to say necessarily a perpetual rebuild, but it feels sometimes like they're in perpetual rebuild mode. And despite all of that, Christian has been a fairly consistent performer, particularly at the tracks where Rahal is strong, like the street and road courses. And even at the tracks where they need some improving, particularly the ovals and particularly at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, I would say that Christian has improved every year at that particular racetrack. So him going to McLaren makes a ton of sense. I think he will really be a legitimate challenger right away for Pato O'Ward in terms of pace, in terms of race wins, in terms of qualifying. And I think Pato needs that. And, with Nolan Siegel kind of being the project, Christian Lundgaard is a driver who is more or less complete, right? He's young, but he's complete. I think you know what you're going to get with Christian Lundgaard. So really, while we say he's a young gun and the press release is very, you know, talks a lot about everything being young and new and fresh at McLaren, he is a solid choice. I think it works well for Christian, and I think it works well for McLaren with the direction that they are headed. So it makes a lot of sense. Alexander Rossi. I wouldn't say it's a surprise that he's leaving the team, but I would say that he's been performing very, very well this particular season. And that will help him significantly to find a ride. I would not have any worries if you're an Alexander Rossi fan that he's not going to get a ride. He even said so in his quote in the press release. You don't perform the way that you do in a series called the IndyCar series at the Indianapolis 500 and not have a ride. That's just the reality of the situation. The interesting thing about Rossi is that I don't think he has anything that he needs to prove at the Indianapolis 500 anymore. What he needs to prove is all of the other races, which he's doing this year. But I think if Rossi does have a choice in where he goes for next year, I think he's going to want to find a team that's a little bit more balanced, not just Indy focused. So let's talk about some of Alexander Rossi's options that are out there. A lot of people throwing out Prema as an option. And sure, but if you're Alexander Rossi, do you want to go to a team that is brand new, and have all of those unknowns? Prema could be, and we know Prema from their, success in Europe, success in all the junior formula in the world, that they know how to put together a racing team. That's not the question mark. But the question mark is, if you're Alexander Rossi, and there are some questions about you from a full season performance standpoint. Again, he's in the top 5 in the points, but those questions still get asked. Do you take a risk on Prema? And I would say probably not. I don't think you take a risk on Prema. So throw that out. I mentioned Chip Ganassi Racing. There's no room at the end there, at least as it seems right now. Now, could Chip get rid of one of his drivers that he currently has? Sure. I can tell you it sure as hell ain't going to be Kiffin Simpson. So would a Chip Ganassi hire Rossi over a Lundgaard, a Lundquist or an Armstrong? I don't know about that. I think he would be a contender at the Indianapolis 500, but I think he would be overshadowed by Dixon and Palou, like many other drivers at that team typically are. Ed Carpenter Racing. Now, Rinus VeeKay, who is currently the lead driver on that team, is in a contract year. It's not necessarily confirmed whether he's going to come back to that team or not. That would certainly be a good option for Rossi at the Indianapolis 500, but it wouldn't necessarily be good the rest of the year. So where can Alexander Rossi go where he doesn't necessarily need to prove himself at the Indy 500 anymore? A team could benefit from his experience, expertise, and speed at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and could also lift Rossi up at the racetracks that he hasn't necessarily had success at in recent years. I think it's obvious, isn't it? It's Rahal. I think what we're going to end up with here is essentially a trade between Lundgaard and Rossi. And we'll see. There are other options that I've just laid out and mentioned where Rossi could go, but I think that Rahal is probably the best option for him. Now, there is a caveat, and we will talk about the Yuri Vips problem with Rahal. But at least for now, if I'm Alexander Rossi and I'm looking at a full season, not just the Indy 500, and I look at the options available, that's probably the most solid one. Just a thought. So let's talk a few more things with silly season. I mentioned Yuri Vips. Now, I guess we'll ask this question. This is totally hypothetical, by the way. Let's say Christian Lundgaard has the 45 car well within the leader circle with a couple of races to go in the season. Is there a scenario where you put Yuri Vips in the 45 at the end of the year? Or do you do the 4th car? I don't know. There's talk about that, but they haven't been keeping Yuri Vips on the sidelines for this long and him under contract if Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan didn't have plans for him. The question mark, of course, becomes how do you sort out the rest of the drivers? Does Pietro Fittipaldi stay? Graham Rahal, I think, pretty obviously is going to stay, right? So you have one seat, maybe another seat, depending on what they decide to do with Pietro Fittipaldi. Is there a possibility the driver lineup ends up Graham Rahal, Alexander Rossi, and Yuri Vips next year? Wouldn't be surprised if that were the driver lineup. Another name that's been going around as a driver who potentially has a ride for next year is Devlin DeFrancesco. Remember that name. Think about him wearing green. Where will Rinus VeeKay go? That's a question too. He is in a contract year. Here's my thoughts. I don't necessarily think there's a better ride out there for Rinus. Maybe Rahal, if he could try to get the 45 car. But I would probably say, if I'm Rinus, I think Rinus is in the best situation he can be in right now with Ed Carpenter Racing. And I think Ed Carpenter really can't find a driver who fits them better right now than Rinus. So I think that stays together. If I were the agents of both of those entities, I would keep them together. My opinion. Who is the second Prema car? And you might ask, well, who's the first? The persistent and loud Logan Sargent rumors continue. So we'll see what happens with Logan Sargent. But I think he's going to be one of the Prema drivers next year. And so the question mark is who's number two? And I wouldn't even begin to guess. I think it will be a driver who will come from a feeder series of some kind. God only knows what feeder series it's going to be. But the persistent rumor of not only Logan Sargent, but of the fact that Prema wants to go very, very young with their driver lineup would seem to indicate that we're going to get two younger drivers, if not two rookies at that team. Make of that what you will. And finally, I keep hearing some things about some Indy Next drivers expanding and moving up the ladder to IndyCar next year and potentially expanding the grid in some cases. One of those drivers I heard potentially is being arranged for a full-time ride at a pretty surprising team. Again, that's not necessarily set in stone yet. I'll have some more details on the DL 500 Club stream if you want to check that out tomorrow. But the other team, at least from my understanding, would be part-time for another Indy Next driver. So, ironically, it doesn't seem like the IndyCar grid is going to get any smaller next year. In fact, against all odds, I think it might expand from a full-time or at least a regular season perspective, which is also good for the Indianapolis 500. So, we always love that when we say the word bump and day back to back. But yeah, that's a silly season update for now. Certainly interesting that Alexander Rossi is out at the end of the season for Arrow McLaren. And Christian Lundgaard is in. What do you guys think down in the comments section below? Let me know. I'll leave you with this. Burning out on the bricks still sucks. We'll see you in the next video.